I need to tell you something that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. For 23 years, I dedicated my life to education. I earned degrees, attended conferences, implemented programs, and truly believed, that I understood what it meant to lead a school. But nothing in my training, nothing in my experience, nothing in my carefully constructed worldview prepared me for what happened in the fall of 2024. What began as a simple administrative decision, removing a photograph from a hallway wall, unleashed a chain of events so extraordinary, so impossible to explain through any rational framework, that it didn't just change my career, it changed my soul, and somehow, impossibly, it changed an entire city. My name is Gregory Thornton, and this is my confession. I was 54 years old when this story begins, serving my 12th year as principal of St. Michael's Academy in Covington, Kentucky. If you don't know Covington, let me paint you a picture. It's a city of about 40,000 people, sitting right across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. You can stand on our riverfront and see the Cincinnati skyline gleaming in the distance. Those tall buildings reflecting the morning sun like a promise of something bigger, something more. We're a proud community, blue-collar roots, strong families, and churches on practically every corner. German and Irish immigrants built this city in the 19th century, and their descendants still walk these streets, still worship in the same churches their great-great-grandparents helped construct with their own hands. The Diocese of Covington has been here since 1853, and Catholicism isn't just a religion in this part of Kentucky. It's woven into the fabric of who we are. You can't drive 3 blocks without passing a parish. St. Mary's Cathedral downtown, with its beautiful twin spires, has been holding Mass since before the Civil War. Mother of God Church, just a few streets over, is so stunning that people come from all over the region just to see its artwork. This is a place where First Communion is still a milestone celebrated with extended family gatherings, where funeral masses draw hundreds, where the rhythm of the liturgical year shapes the rhythm of daily life. Or at least, it used to. Like everywhere else in America, things were changing. Fewer young families at Sunday Mass, more empty pews, more questions about whether institutions built by our grandparents would survive into the next generation. St. Michael's Academy was founded in 1921 by the Sisters of Notre Dame. The building itself is a beautiful old structure, red brick, high ceilings, those tall windows that let in streams of golden light on autumn afternoons. Walking through its corridors, you can still feel the presence of all the generations who came before. The hardwood floors are worn smooth by a century of footsteps. The walls are lined with black and white photographs of graduating classes dating back to when women wore long skirts and men had slicked back hair. There's a trophy case near the gymnasium filled with championship banners from decades past, and a memorial wall honoring alumni who served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and every conflict since. We served about 600 students, kindergarten through 12th grade, and we were known throughout the region for academic excellence, competitive athletics, and strong moral formation. Our test scores consistently ranked among the top in the state. Our football team had won 3 state championships in the past 20 years. Our debate club, our robotics team, our service programs, all received recognition and awards. At least, that's what our brochures said. That's what I believed we stood for. The faculty was a mix of lay teachers and a handful of religious sisters who had devoted their entire lives to Catholic education. Some had been teaching at St. Michael's for longer than I had been alive. They knew the names of students, grandparents, remembered scandals and triumphs from generations past, carried the institutional memory of the school in their hearts. These were people who had given everything to this place, who had turned down higher-paying jobs in public schools because they believed Catholic education was a calling, not just a career. I grew up Catholic, baptized at St. Augustine Church right here in Covington, made my first communion, was confirmed, attended Catholic schools my entire life. But somewhere along the way, and I couldn't tell you exactly when, my faith became more cultural than spiritual. I went to Mass on Sundays, mostly. I knew the prayers, the responses, the rituals, but did I really believe? Did I truly think that bread and wine became the body and blood of Christ? Did I genuinely accept that saints could intercede from heaven, that miracles still happened in our modern world? If I'm being honest, and I need to be honest now, After everything, the answer was no. I had become what theologians might call a practical atheist. I wore the label of Catholic like a comfortable old coat, but inside, I had emptied it of meaning. This matters because it explains what I did. It explains why I thought removing that image was not just acceptable, but necessary. The image in question was a photograph of Carlo Acutis. If you're watching this video, you probably know who he was, the Italian teenager who died of leukemia in 2006 at just 15 years old, who was beatified in 2020 and canonized by Pope Leo XIV in September of 2025. But in my defense, though, I'm not sure I deserve a defense. I knew almost nothing about him when this story began. I had heard the name. I knew he was some kind of young saint in the making who was popular with teenagers because he liked computers. That was the extent of my knowledge. I hadn't read his story. I hadn't understood his profound devotion to the Eucharist, his tender love for the poor, his remarkable spiritual wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. To me, he was just another face in the ever-expanding gallery of Catholic figures that decorated our school. The photograph had been placed in our main hallway in October of 2020, right after Carlo's beatification. Sister Margaret Riley, our beloved theology teacher who had served at St. Michael's for 31 years, had requested permission to create a small devotional space near the chapel entrance. I had approved it without much thought. It seemed harmless enough. A framed photograph of the young Beato, a small votive candle holder, a few holy cards for students who wanted them. Sister Margaret had explained that Carlo Acutis was especially relevant to our students because of his youth and his love of technology. He speaks their language, she had said, her eyes bright with that gentle enthusiasm that characterized everything she did. He shows them that holiness isn't just for old people in ancient paintings. I had nodded and signed the approval form and promptly forgotten about it. But over the next 4 years, something unexpected happened. That small devotional space became a gathering point. Students began stopping there between classes, some just pausing for a moment, others kneeling on the floor in prayer. I would walk by and see teenagers, with their eyes closed, lips moving silently, faces peaceful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. There was something about Carlo's image that spoke to young people in a way that the older saints didn't. Maybe it was because he looked like them. Maybe it was because his story included computers and video games and the ordinary stuff of modern adolescent life. Whatever the reason, they were drawn to him. Teachers reported that students were asking questions about Carlo Acutis in class, wanting to know more about his life, his miracles, his message. They wanted to know about his website documenting Eucharistic miracles, about his care for the homeless, people he encountered on the streets of Milan, about how he managed to be both a normal kid and a genuine saint in the making. A group of senior girls started a Carlo Acutis club that met every Wednesday after school to pray the rosary and discuss his writings. They made t-shirts with his face and his famous quote about the Eucharist. They organized a bake sale to raise money for the homeless shelter downtown, inspired by Carlo's example of service. Our IT teacher, Mr. Henderson, told me that students had started putting Carlo's image as their phone wallpapers and laptop screensavers. "I've been teaching here for 15 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. "I've never seen kids get excited about a religious figure like this. Usually they roll their eyes at that stuff. But Carlo, they actually want to learn about him. They relate to him." There was even talk of a student pilgrimage to Assisi, where Carlo's body is preserved and displayed. A trip that several families were willing to fund because their children had asked so passionately to go. I should have been pleased. Isn't this exactly what a Catholic school should hope for? Students developing authentic faith, finding role models in the saints, growing in prayer. But instead, I felt something else, something I'm ashamed to name but must. I felt uncomfortable, perhaps even threatened. You see, the world was changing around us. The culture was shifting. Every week, it seemed, there was another news story about religious schools facing lawsuits, complaints, pressure to secularize. Parents who weren't Catholic but chose our school for its academic reputation were starting to voice concerns. One father, a successful attorney who served on our fundraising board, had mentioned at a meeting that his daughter felt excluded by all the religious imagery. "We chose St. Michael's for the education," he said, not the indoctrination. Another parent, whose son was one of our star basketball players, had complained that the emphasis on Catholic identity might limit our appeal to top students from other backgrounds. If you want to compete with the best private schools, she told me, you need to be more inclusive. Inclusive? That word began to echo in my mind. It appeared in articles I read about the future of Catholic education. It showed up in workshops I attended about enrollment strategies. It whispered to me in the quiet moments when I worried about budget shortfalls and declining registration numbers. St. Michael's enrollment had dropped by 12% over the past decade. We weren't alone. Catholic schools across the country were closing their doors. I lay awake at night, wondering if I would be the principal who presided over the end of a century-old institution. And so, in the twisted logic that fear creates, I began to see our Catholic identity not as our strength, but as our weakness. I began to view the crucifixes on our walls, the statues in our gardens, the prayers that opened each school day as obstacles to our survival. I told myself I was being strategic, progressive. I was ensuring that St. Michael's would still be serving students in another 100 years. I was making the hard decisions that leadership required. The decision to remove Carlo Acutis's image came in late. September of 2024. I had just returned from a conference in Chicago where speaker after speaker had talked about making faith-based schools more welcoming to diverse perspectives. I had collected business cards from consultants who specialized in helping religious schools modernize their brand. I was full of new ideas, new energy, new determination to transform St. Michael's into something that could thrive in the 21st century. I didn't announce my decision to the faculty. I didn't consult with Father Thomas, our chaplain. I didn't even mention it to Sister Margaret. On a Friday afternoon, after the students had gone home, I walked to the devotional space near the chapel, removed the framed photograph of Carlo Acutis from the wall, collected the votive candle holder and the holy cards, and carried everything to a storage closet in the basement. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes. Standing in that basement, surrounded by old textbooks and broken desks, I looked at the photograph in my hands. Carlo's face gazed up at me, those kind eyes, that gentle smile, the expression of someone who seemed to know something I didn't. For just a moment, I felt a flicker of something, doubt, maybe, or warning, but I pushed it aside. I was the principal. I knew what was best for this school. I set the photograph face down on a shelf, turned off the light, and climbed the stairs back to my office. Monday morning, I arrived at school early, as I always did. The October sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I let myself in through the main entrance, disabled the alarm, and walked through the silent hallways, enjoying the peace before the chaos of another school day began. My footsteps echoed on the old wooden floors as I passed the chapel, past the empty space on the wall where the photograph had been. I stopped. The wall wasn't empty. For a long moment, I simply stood there, my briefcase hanging from my frozen fingers. My breath caught somewhere in my chest. Where I had removed the photograph 3 days ago, there was now a mark on the wall. Not a shadow, not a stain, something else entirely. It was faint, almost like looking at an image through frosted glass, but unmistakably present. The outline of a face. A young face. Eyes that seemed to look directly at me. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. The image was still there. The morning light from the tall windows fell across the corridor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. The heating system hummed its familiar rhythm. Everything else was normal, ordinary, exactly as it should be. Everything except that impossible mark on the wall that had no business being there. My rational mind immediately began generating explanations. Water damage from a pipe somewhere above. A trick of the early morning light, hitting the wall at just the right angle. Some kind of residue from where the frame had hung for years. Chemicals from the photograph somehow leaching into the plaster. I walked closer, reached out, and touched the wall. The surface was smooth, dry, and unremarkable. There was no physical explanation for what I was seeing. Yet there it was, a ghostly impression of the photograph I had removed, still visible on the wall, like a memory that refused to be erased. I stood there for probably 10 minutes, examining the wall from every angle. I got close enough that my nose nearly touched it. I stepped back to to the opposite wall and squinted. I even took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, hoping that different illumination would reveal some obvious cause. Nothing, the image remained. Faint but undeniable. Impossible but present. I decided not to mention it to anyone. What would I say? I convinced myself that it would fade, that the cleaning staff would wipe it away, that by the end of the week I would have forgotten all about it. But I was wrong. By Wednesday, the image on the wall had become slightly more distinct. By Friday, students were beginning to notice. I was walking through the hallway during the passing period between classes when I heard the freshman girls talking. "Do you see that?" one of them said, pointing at the wall. "It's like a face." "That's where the Carlo picture used to be," her friend replied. "My sister told me they took it down. But look, it's like it's still there." I hurried past, pretending I hadn't heard. But over the following days, more and more students began gathering in that spot between classes. They would stand there, heads tilted, squinting at the wall. Some pulled out their phones to take pictures. Others just stared, their expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper, wonder, perhaps, or reverence. Sister Margaret came to my office on the Tuesday of the second week. She was 73 years old, small and slight, with white hair and eyes that had seen decades of students pass through these halls. She walked with a slight stoop now, the result of years spent bending over student desks and kneeling on hard chapel floors. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and her spirit remained undimmed. She had taught theology at St. Michael's for 31 years, had prepared thousands of children for their first communion and confirmation, had counseled countless teenagers through crises of faith and family. She was, in many ways, the soul of the school, more beloved by students and faculty than any principal could ever hope to be, myself included. Sister Margaret had been one of the first to embrace the devotion to Carlo Acutis when he was beatified. She had researched his life extensively, had travelled to Assisi on her own pilgrimage to see his incorrupt body, had returned with stories that she shared with anyone who would listen. "This young man," she would say, her eyes bright with conviction, "is exactly the saint our young people need. He shows them that holiness isn't about being strange or separate from the world. It's about loving God right in the middle of ordinary life." She had always treated me with respect, even when she disagreed with my decisions, which was often. She was too wise and too experienced to confront authority directly, but she had ways of making her opinions known. A raised eyebrow here, a pointed question there, a gentle but unmistakable disapproval that somehow carried more weight than any argument. And that afternoon, as she settled into the chair across from my desk, her gaze held something new, something that looked almost like pity. "Gregory," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I need to speak with you about what's happening in the hallway." I pretended ignorance. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." Her voice was gentle but firm. "The image on the wall. The one that appeared after you removed Carlo's photograph." "It's just a stain," I said quickly. "Some kind of residue. I've asked the maintenance staff to clean it. They've tried," Sister Margaret replied. "3 times now. Paint doesn't cover it. Cleaner doesn't remove it. They even tried sanding the wall. The image came back within hours, clearer than before. I felt a chill run down my spine, though I tried not to show it. There has to be a logical explanation." Sister Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, her aged hands folded in her lap. "Gregory, I've been teaching at this school for 31 years. I've seen students struggle and triumph. I've watched children lose their faith and find it again. I've witnessed small miracles, the kind that happen when young hearts open themselves to grace. But I've never seen anything like this." She paused, her eyes searching my face. "Have you considered that perhaps this is not a problem to be solved? Perhaps it's a message to be received?" I dismissed her words, politely, professionally, but firmly. I told her that I would consult with maintenance experts, perhaps bring in a contractor to examine the wall. I assured her that there was nothing supernatural about a discoloration on century-old plaster. She listened to all of this without interruption, and when I had finished, she simply rose from her chair, nodded once, and said, "I'll be praying for you, Gregory." Then she left. That night, I dreamed of Carlo Acutis. I had never seen his face except in that photograph, but in my dream, I knew it was him. We were standing in the hallway of St. Michael's, but the walls were made of light, pulsing with a gentle golden radiance that seemed alive. The floor beneath our feet was solid, but I couldn't see what it was made of. It seemed to be light as well, or perhaps something beyond light, something my dream mind couldn't fully comprehend. Carlo was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, looking exactly like any American teenager you might see at a shopping mall. But his eyes held something infinite. They were the eyes of someone who had seen beyond the veil, who knew secrets the rest of us could only guess at. "Why did you take down my picture?" he asked. His voice was curious, not accusing, like a child genuinely trying to understand. There was no anger in his tone, no judgment, just pure, open curiosity. I was trying to help the school, I heard myself say. Even in the dream, I knew how weak the excuse sounded. "The school?" He tilted his head slightly, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Or yourself?" I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, at 3:33 in the morning. The numbers on my bedside clock glowed red in the darkness. Patricia stirred beside me, but didn't wake. For a long time, I lay there in the darkness of my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of our house, the tick of the grandfather clock downstairs, the hum of the refrigerator, my wife's gentle breathing. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream, just the product of stress and an overactive imagination. The mind plays tricks when you're under pressure. Dreams don't mean anything. But somewhere deep inside, in a place I had walled off years ago, I felt the first crack forming in my carefully constructed certainty. And once a crack forms in a wall, water always finds a way through. The events of the following weeks became increasingly difficult to explain away. On October 25th, a 7th grade student named Emma Patterson collapsed during gym class. The gym to Coach Williams immediately called 911 while other staff members performed CPR. By the time the ambulance arrived, Emma had no pulse and wasn't breathing. The paramedics worked on her for 18 minutes, far longer than standard protocol, because her parents hadn't yet arrived and the school was pleading with them not to stop. What happened next was witnessed by 4 adults and approximately 30 students. Emma's mother, Rachel Patterson, came running through the gymnasium doors just as the lead paramedic was preparing to call time of death. Rachel was a nurse at St. Elizabeth Hospital herself. She knew what 18 minutes without a pulse meant. She knew the statistics, the outcomes, the slim to none chance that her daughter would ever wake up. But she came anyway, having broken every speed limit between her workplace and the school. She was hysterical, screaming her daughter's name, her scrubs still splattered with the blood of whatever patient she had been treating when she got the call. Rachel pushed past the medical team and threw herself onto the gym floor next to Emma's lifeless body. She grabbed her daughter's hand, cold now, the blood having settled into pooling patterns that any medical professional would recognize as signs of death. And then, in a voice cracked with desperation, she began to pray. "Carlo Acutis," she sobbed. "Please intercede for my daughter. Please ask our Lord to save her. Please, Carlo, please." It wasn't a formal prayer. It wasn't beautiful or eloquent. It was the raw, desperate cry of a mother watching her child slip away forever. Later, Rachel told me that she didn't know why she had called on Carlo specifically. She had heard about the image on our wall, but hadn't paid much attention to it. She wasn't even particularly devout, a Christmas and Easter Catholic at best. But in that moment of absolute despair, the name came to her lips as if placed there by an outside force. According to multiple witnesses, at the exact moment Rachel Patterson spoke Carlo's name, a light appeared, not from the gymnasium's fluorescent fixtures overhead, but from somewhere else, from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was described as warm, golden, and impossibly bright, without being painful to look at. Coach Williams, a man not given to emotional displays or supernatural beliefs, told me later that it was like someone turned on the sun inside the building. The paramedics froze, their hands still on Emma's chest, their faces slack with disbelief. Students who had been standing against the walls, watching in terrified silence, fell to their knees. Some later reported seeing a figure within the light, a teenage boy smiling peacefully, though others saw only the light itself. It lasted only a few seconds, perhaps 3 or 4 heartbeats, and when it faded, Emma Patterson opened her eyes, sat up, and asked what had happened. The paramedics couldn't explain it. The doctors at St. Elizabeth Hospital in nearby Fort Thomas couldn't explain it. Emma had been clinically dead for nearly 20 minutes. Yet she showed no signs of brain damage, no organ failure, no residual effects of any kind. Within 48 hours, she was released from the hospital with a completely clean bill of health. The story might have stayed within our school community. Strange things happen. People keep them to themselves. Life goes on. But one of the students who had witnessed the event had recorded part of it on their phone. They posted it to TikTok. Within 3 days, it had been viewed over 2 million times. Suddenly, St. Michael's Academy was at the center of a firestorm. News vans began packing outside our gates. Reporters stood on our sidewalks, doing live broadcasts. My phone rang constantly. Local news, national news, Catholic media, secular media, podcasters, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted to know about the miracle at St. Michael's. Everyone wanted to see the mysterious image on the wall. I tried to maintain control. I issued a statement saying that the school was investigating the reported events and asking for privacy. I prohibited media from entering the building. I instructed teachers not to speak to reporters. But it was like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. The image on the wall had continued to grow clearer. By early November, it was unmistakably a portrait of Carlo Acutis, the same image I had removed. Somehow, imprinted on the plaster itself, experts came to examine it. A professor of chemistry from the University of Cincinnati took samples of the wall material and found nothing unusual, just ordinary plaster and paint. A team from a paranormal investigation group spent an entire night in the hallway with their equipment and reported electromagnetic readings that they described as off the charts. A skeptic organization sent representatives who examined the wall for hours, searching for evidence of a hoax, and left without finding any. But the image was just the beginning. On November 8th, a sophomore named Marcus Williams, no relation to our gym teacher, came to school wearing a back brace he had worn for 3 years due to severe scoliosis. His condition had been deteriorating, and his doctors were recommending surgery. That morning, Marcus felt compelled to stop at the image on the wall and pray. He told me later that he had never been particularly religious, but something drew him there, something he couldn't name. He stood before the image for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he felt what he described as heat spreading through my spine, like warm water flowing through my bones. When he arrived at his first class, he realized he was standing straighter than he had in years. By lunch, he had removed the back brace. His mother took him to his orthopedist that afternoon, and the x-rays showed what the doctor called a complete and spontaneous correction of the spinal curvature. The word impossible was used repeatedly in the medical report. 2 days later, a cafeteria worker named Gloria Mendez, who had been blind in her left eye since a childhood accident in Guatemala, stopped to pray at the image during her break. Gloria was 58 years old and had worked at St. Michael's for over a decade. She was a quiet woman, deeply devout who attended daily mass at her parish and spent her lunch breaks reading devotional books in the corner of the kitchen. When she heard about the image on the wall, she had wanted to see it for herself, but felt shy about joining the crowds of students and visitors. Finally, one Tuesday afternoon, she gathered her courage and walked to the hallway. She told me later that she hadn't asked for healing. She hadn't even thought to ask. "I just wanted to pray," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "I wanted to thank God for all my blessings. I wanted to thank Carlo for inspiring the children. I wasn't thinking about my eye. I had accepted my blindness long ago. It was just part of who I was." But as she prayed, she felt what she described as a warmth spreading across my face, like standing in the sun after being in a cold room. When she opened her eyes, both eyes, the world looked different, fuller, more complete. She could see the wall clearly from her left side, the details of the image, the grain of the plaster, things she hadn't seen in over 40 years. By the end of her shift, she could see clearly from both eyes. The ophthalmologist who examined her could find no explanation. The optic nerve that had been damaged since childhood showed no signs of healing. Yet Gloria could see perfectly. Medically impossible. The doctor wrote in his notes, "No organic explanation for restoration of vision." The following week, a teacher's aide named Robert Chun, who had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer and given 6 months to live, spent his lunch hour kneeling before the wall. Robert was 43, a father of 3 young children, a man who had been preparing to die. He had already written letters to each of his kids, to be opened on their graduations, their weddings, the births of their children, all the moments he expected to miss. He had made peace with his fate, or tried to. I wasn't asking for a miracle, he told me afterward, tears streaming down his face. I was asking for courage. I was asking for the strength to be brave for my family. I was asking to die well. But something happened as he knelt there. He felt a hand on his shoulder, a physical touch, though no one was standing near him. He felt heat spreading through his abdomen, the area where the cancer had taken hold. And he heard a voice, soft and young, say simply, "Not yet. Your children need you." His next scan showed no trace of cancer anywhere in his body. His oncologist called it a spontaneous and complete remission that defies every model we have for understanding this disease. Robert was supposed to be dead by Christmas. Instead, he was coaching his son's Little League team by spring. Word spread through Covington like wildfire, then through the surrounding communities, then across the entire region. People began coming, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. They gathered on the sidewalk outside our school, waiting for a chance to enter and see the image, to pray before it, to ask for their own miracles. Traffic on our street became impossible. Local businesses were overwhelmed. The police had to set up barriers to manage the crowds. The Diocese of Covington sent an official delegation to investigate. Bishop Robert Brennan himself came to see the image, accompanied by theologians, canon lawyers, and medical consultants. They conducted interview with Emma Patterson, Marcus Williams, Gloria Mendez, Robert Chun, and dozens of other witnesses. They examined the wall extensively. They reviewed medical records. When they departed after 3 days, Bishop Brennan gave a brief statement saying that the events at St. Michael's were under serious investigation and that the faithful should approach with both openness and discernment. But the people didn't wait for official pronouncements. They kept coming, and I, the man who had started all of this by removing a photograph, was forced to watch as everything I had believed about the world crumbled around me. The crisis came to a head on the evening of November 15th. I was alone in my office, long after everyone else had gone home, sitting in the darkness and trying to make sense of what was happening. The protesters who thought the school was perpetrating a hoax had finally left for the night. The pilgrims who came seeking healing had dispersed until morning. The building was silent except for the hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of century-old timber settling. I don't know what drew me out of my office. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something else entirely. But I found myself walking through the dark hallways toward the image on the wall, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. When I turned the corner, I stopped breathing. Carlo Acutis was standing there, not the image on the wall, him, a teenage boy, solid and present, wearing that same simple outfit from my dream. He was looking at the wall, where his photograph had been, where his face now appeared imprinted in the plaster. And then he turned and looked at me. I should have been terrified. I should have run. But instead, I felt a peace wash over me unlike anything I had ever experienced, a warmth that started in my chest and spread outward until my entire body was enveloped in what I can only describe as love. Pure, unconditional, overwhelming love. "Hello, Mr. Thornton," Carlo said. His English was accented but clear, and his voice carried the warmth of his smile. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "Many things are possible," he replied gently. "More things than your philosophy has dreamed of." He smiled at the reference, and despite everything, despite the impossibility of what was happening, I found myself almost smiling back. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why is this happening?" Carlo walked toward me, and I noticed that his feet made no sound on the wooden floor. "You asked why I let this happen. But I want you to understand something. I didn't do this. God did. I am only his instrument. All the saints are only instruments. We don't perform miracles. We pray. We intercede. We ask. And sometimes, when it aligns with his will, God says yes. But why here? Why this school? I removed your picture. I wanted you gone." "Yes." Carlo's expression grew thoughtful. "You wanted me gone because you were afraid. Afraid of what faith demands. Afraid of what belief requires. Afraid that if God is real, then everything you've built your life around might be wrong. He paused. That kind of fear is a prison, Mr. Thornton. I know because I see it in so many hearts. People who call themselves Catholic, but who live as if God doesn't exist. People who say the prayers, but don't believe the words. They're not evil. They're just lost. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes, and I was powerless to stop them. I thought I was doing the right thing, for the school. No, Carlo said softly. You thought you were doing the safe thing. There's a difference. He stepped closer, and I could feel warmth radiating from him like heat, from a gentle fire. The Eucharist is my highway to heaven. Do you know why I said that? Because the Eucharist requires everything from us. It requires us to believe in the impossible. It requires us to trust that bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, even when our senses tell us otherwise. It requires faith. And faith, real faith, is the most frightening thing in the world because it asks us to surrender control. I don't know how. I admitted, and the words came out broken, barely a whisper. Carlo reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. I felt it, actually felt the weight and warmth of his touch, solid and real. You start by being honest. You started tonight, by coming Eddie, by admitting that you don't understand, by allowing yourself to wonder. That's all faith is. At the beginning, wonder, openness, a willingness to consider that perhaps the universe is bigger than you thought. He removed his hand, and the warmth lingered. The image will remain on that wall, Mr. Thornton, not because I want to embarrass you or punish you, but because this school, this city, needs to remember. You tried to make St. Michael's something smaller, something safer. God is making it something bigger, something that will touch thousands of lives. People will come here seeking healing, and many will find it, not because the wall has power, but because their faith does, because they open their hearts to grace, and God responds. What about me? I asked. What am I supposed to do now? Carlo smiled, and in that smile I saw centuries of wisdom contained in a 15-year-old face. Lead, but differently now. Lead with faith instead of fear. Trust that a Catholic school's greatest strength is not its test scores or its athletic trophies, but its mission. The saints and the prayers and the crucifixes, these aren't obstacles to success. They're invitations to encounter the living God. If you teach your students that, really teach them, you'll have given them something more valuable than any diploma. He began to fade, his form becoming translucent. The warm golden light that surrounded him slowly dimming. Wait, I called out. Will I see you again? His voice came from somewhere that seemed both very close and infinitely far away. You'll see me every time you look at that wall. You'll see me in every student who prays there. You'll see me in every miracle that happens when someone opens their heart to heaven. A pause, and then, faintly, and you'll see me at Mass, Mr. Thornton, in the Eucharist. That's where I've always been. That's where I'll always be. And then he was gone. I don't know how long I stood there in the darkened hallway. It might have been minutes. It might have been hours. When I finally moved, my legs were stiff and my face was wet with tears. I didn't remember crying. I walked to the wall where Carlo's image shimmered faintly in the darkness, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I dropped to my knees and really prayed. Not the rote recitation of words I had learned as a child, but a genuine outpouring of my soul. I confessed everything, my doubts, my fears, my practical atheism dressed in Catholic clothing, my pride in thinking I knew better than the tradition that had shaped this school for a century. I asked for forgiveness. I asked for guidance. I asked for the faith I had never really possessed. And somewhere in the depths of that prayer, in the silence of that empty hallway, I felt something shift inside me. The walls I had built around my heart, the ones that kept God at a safe distance, began to crumble. And in their place, something new started to grow. Something small and fragile, but alive. Faith. The next morning, I called an assembly. Every student, every teacher, every staff member gathered in our gymnasium. I stood at the podium, looked out at their expectant faces, and did something I had never done in my 23 years in education. I told the truth. I told them everything, how I had removed Carlo's photograph, why I had done it, what I had witnessed since. I told them about the healings I couldn't explain, about the image that wouldn't fade, about the encounter I had experienced the night before. I didn't embellish or dramatize. I simply told them what had happened, And then I apologized. I was wrong, I said, and my voice cracked as I spoke. I was wrong to remove that image. I was wrong to think that our Catholic identity was something to be hidden or minimized. I was wrong to let fear guide my decisions instead of faith, and I am asking for your forgiveness. The gymnasium was completely silent. One could see Sister Margaret in the front row, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped in front of her chest. I could see students looking at each other in astonishment. I could see teachers whose expressions ranged from shock to skepticism to something that looked like hope. And then something remarkable happened. Emma Patterson, the girl who had died and come back to life in this very gymnasium, stood up from her seat in the bleachers. She was 13 years old, small for her age, with brown hair and glasses and braces on her teeth. She walked across the gym floor, climbed the steps to the stage, and stood beside me at the podium. "Mr. Thornton isn't making this up," she said, her young voice steady and clear. "I know because I was there, not in the hallway, in the other place. When my heart stopped, I went somewhere filled with light, and I saw him, Carlo. He was there, and he smiled at me, and he told me it wasn't my time yet. He said I had work to do here. He said St. Michael's had work to do." She paused, and her voice dropped almost to a whisper that was somehow still audible throughout the silent gymnasium. "He said to tell everyone that the Eucharist is the answer, that Jesus is really present in the bread and wine, that if we believe that, really believe it, everything else will fall into place." A moment of profound stillness, and then, from somewhere in the bleachers, someone began to clap. One person at first, then another, then dozens, until the entire gymnasium erupted in applause that seemed to shake the old building to its foundations. Students were crying, teachers were crying, I was crying, and through my tears, I saw Sister Margaret rise to her feet, her aged face radiant with joy, her hands raised toward heaven. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Covington had ever experienced. The news of what was happening at St. Michael's spread far beyond our city, beyond our state, beyond our country. Pilgrims came from every corner of America, from Canada and Mexico, from Europe and South America and Asia. They came in wheelchairs and on crutches, carrying photographs of sick loved ones, clutching rosaries and prayer cards. They lined up for hours to stand before the image on our wall, to pray, to hope, to believe. Not everyone was healed. That's important to say. Miracles are not vending machines where you insert prayer and receive health. Many people came with terrible burdens and left still carrying them. But something happened to almost everyone who prayed there, something less visible but perhaps equally important. They found peace. They found hope. They found a renewed sense that God was real, that heaven was real, that their suffering had meaning. The Diocese of Covington established a formal commission to investigate the events at our school. Medical experts reviewed case after case of reported healings. Theologians examined the circumstances of the image's appearance. After 18 months of rigorous investigation, Bishop Brennan announced that 23 healings met the criteria for being considered scientifically and medically inexplicable, and that the image on our wall bore all the marks of authentic supernatural origin. The Vatican sent its own investigators. They were thorough, skeptical, and meticulous, as they should be. The process of formal recognition would take years, perhaps decades. But informally, the faithful had already decided. Carlo Acutis was present at St. Michael's Academy. Miracles were happening. God was at work. As for me, I remained principal of St. Michael's, but I was a different kind of leader. I reinstated every religious tradition I had ever considered removing. I expanded our chapel program. I brought in speakers to share their faith journeys with our students. I worked with Sister Margaret, who, at 75, had more energy than ever, to develop a new curriculum centered on the lives of the saints, with special emphasis on Carlo Acutis. But more than the external changes, something had transformed within me. I started going to daily mass. I went to confession for the first time in over 30 years, and wept in that small wooden booth as I unburdened decades of accumulated doubt and sin. I began to pray, really pray, from the heart. Not just the memorized words, but genuine conversation with a God I now knew was listening. My wife, Patricia, noticed the change immediately. We had been married for 28 years. and she had watched my faith slowly drain away like water from a leaking vessel. She had prayed for me all those years, quietly and persistently, never nagging but never giving up. When I finally told her what had happened, when I finally shared everything including my encounter with Carlo, she held me as I cried and whispered into my ear, I always knew he would find a way to bring you back. Our children noticed too. Thomas, our oldest, had drifted away from the church in college and hadn't been to Mass in years. When he heard what had happened to me, he was skeptical. He's a scientist, a researcher, trained to doubt. But he came to visit, stood before the image on the wall, and something changed in his eyes too. He started asking questions, real questions, the kind that come from genuine searching, not dismissal. Last month, he told me he had started attending Mass again. Baby steps, he said, but steps in the right direction. Our daughter Christine brought her children to St. Michael's from their home in Indianapolis. My grandchildren, aged 7 and 5, stood before the image with the unquestioning faith that only children possess. Is that the boy who went to heaven, Grandpa? My granddaughter asked. Yes, sweetheart, I said. His name is Carlo. He looks nice, she said. I bet Jesus really likes him. And I realized that was it. Really. The whole thing distilled to its essence. Carlo was nice. He liked Jesus. Jesus liked him. And through that simple mutual love, extraordinary things became possible. Covington itself was transformed. The city that had been quietly declining, losing population and businesses to larger neighbors, suddenly found itself at the center of something extraordinary. Hotels filled with pilgrims, restaurants thrived, new shops opened downtown. But more than the economic impact, there was a spiritual renewal that touched every corner of the community. Churches that had been half empty on Sundays were suddenly packed. Confession lines stretched out the doors of parish rectories. Young people were asking about vocations to the priesthood and religious life. Father Thomas, our chaplain, baptized more adults in the year following the miracle than had been baptized in the previous decade combined. The RCIA program at our parish had to be expanded 3 times to accommodate all the people seeking to enter the Catholic Church. Protestant ministers, initially skeptical, began sending their own congregants to see the image. Whatever is happening here, one Baptist pastor told me, it's drawing people closer to Jesus. I can't be against that. There were skeptics. Of course, there will always be skeptics. Television programs, Ed exposes, claiming the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. Professional debunkers visited our school and published lengthy articles explaining how the so-called miracles could all be attributed to natural causes, misdiagnosis, or fraud. Atheist organizations threatened lawsuits if we allowed religious pilgrimage activities during school hours. One particularly aggressive journalist camped outside my home for a week, demanding that I admit my role in perpetrating this scam on vulnerable people. I understood their doubt. I had lived in that doubt for most of my adult life. All I could do was tell them what I knew, what I had seen, what I had experienced, what had happened to my own heart. Some were convinced. Many were not. But the miracles continued regardless of what anyone believed about them. And eventually most of the skeptics moved on to other targets. 3 years have passed since I removed that photograph from the wall. 3 years since my encounter with Carlo in the darkened hallway. 3 years since my life was split into before and after, into the man I was and the man I am still becoming. St. Michael's Academy has never been stronger. Enrollment has more than doubled. We've had to build to new wings to accommodate all the students, and a third is already in the planning stages. Our waiting list extends into the hundreds, with families from across the country hoping to send their children to the school where miracles happen. And every single day, pilgrims still come to stand before the image that I tried to erase and that God chose to make permanent. The diocese has established a permanent office to manage the pilgrimage operations. Trained volunteers guide visitors through the hallway in organized groups, ensuring that school activities can continue while still welcoming those who come seeking hope. A small gift shop has opened near the entrance, selling holy cards and prayer books and rosaries blessed at the site. The proceeds fund scholarships for students who couldn't otherwise afford a Catholic education, something that would have made Carlo, with his deep love for the poor, very happy. I walk by that wall every morning when I arrive at school. I pause there, as so many do, and I pray. Sometimes I ask for things: healing for a sick student, wisdom for a difficult decision, patience for the challenges of the day. But mostly, I just say thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for sending Carlo to shake me out of my comfortable unbelief. Thank you for the gift of faith that I had rejected for so long and that I now treasure above everything else I possess. Last September, I traveled to Rome for the canonization of Carlo Acutis. I stood in St. Peter's Square with 200,000 other people as Pope Leo XIV declared that this teenager from Milan was now and forever a saint of the Catholic Church. When the moment came, when the Holy Father pronounced the words of canonization, I wept openly, not tears of sadness, but tears of joy. Joy that I had lived to see this moment. Joy that I had been part of Carlo's story, even in my failure and doubt. Joy that the God of the universe cared enough about one struggling school principal in Kentucky to break through his defenses and offer him new life. On my last night in Rome, I visited the Basilica of San Giovanni in Laterano, the cathedral church of the Pope. It was late and the vast interior was nearly empty. I knelt before the altar and prayed for everyone I loved, for my school, for my city. And in the silence, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't see anything this time, but I heard a voice, quiet and warm, speaking directly to my heart. "Well done," it said. "Keep going." And I knew it was him. I'm 60 years old now. I don't know how many more years I'll serve as principal of St. Michael's Academy. I don't know what challenges still lie ahead, what tests of faith await me. But I know this: I will never again try to remove the sacred from my school. I will never again let fear convince me that faith is a weakness. I will never again live as if God is just an idea rather than a living reality. Carlo Acutis was 15 when he died. He had only 15 years to live his faith, to love the Eucharist, to serve the poor, to show the world what holiness looks like in jeans and sneakers. 15 years. And yet the impact of those 15 years continues to ripple outward, touching lives across the globe, reaching even into the heart of a doubting school principal in a small Kentucky city. If Carlo could do so much in 15 years, what excuse do any of us have? I removed a saint's image from a wall because I thought I knew better. What followed shocked an entire city and saved my soul. Every day, I'm grateful that God refused to stay removed. Every day, I'm grateful that Carlo came back. And every day, I pray that you, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever doubts you're carrying, whatever walls you've built around your heart, will open yourself to the same grace that found me. Because if God can reach Gregory Thornton, practical atheist, pride-filled principal, professional skeptic in Catholic clothing, a man who thought he knew better than the traditions of his own faith, then God can reach anyone. All you have to do is stop running. All you have to do is turn around. All you have to do is open your heart to the possibility that the universe is bigger than you thought. That love is stronger than death. That a 15-year-old boy from Milan can still change lives from heaven. All you have to do is believe. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to ask for Carlo Acutis' intercession in your own life. Subscribe to this channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more stories about the miracles and saints who remind us that heaven is closer than we think.